Okay, shopping's done, dog's walked, house is relatively clean enough anyway. I now have approximately 6 hours to squeeze in a recording and editing of an end of year video before it becomes not the end of year anymore, and in fact a whole last new year. That was the dog, in case you're wondering what that clattering noise was. He has just had a walk, but that doesn't mean he's calm by any stretch of the imagination. Anyway, I am completely off script for this one. Normally in my end of year videos I script something. You can tell I'm off script because I will periodically be sipping tea. I'll try and edit as much of that out as possible, but you know, it's going to fucking suck. But here we are. This is what we've come to. Partly because I've just spent most of Christmas with family and only got back yesterday and not really had time to do anything, anything at all. But also partly because there's just not really anything to talk about. Well, there is stuff to talk about and we're going to get into that. But as far as like my games of the year are concerned, you know, I normally do a top 10 of the year, but if I was to do that this year, it would be probably 8 games I've actually played and 2 more that I think look cool, you know what I mean? Like, I've just not had time this year to actually sit and bash out a proper 15, 20, whatever, how many games I normally play in a year. So here we are. This is what we're getting, unfortunately, this year. Me off script, and then my editor self desperately scrambling to turn this into something. But I do have something I want to talk about, so let's get into that, shall we? Let's get into that. So I have played some decent games this year, you know, I have. I don't want to knock them, I don't want to do them a massive disservice. I mean, Cassette Piece was pretty cool. That Among the Storm, I played a little bit and it seems pretty decent. There was other stuff as well, I'm sure. Just because it's not coming to me doesn't mean it wasn't good. But I mean, my game of the year, like everyone, like the entire fucking internet, like the Game Awards, like every single content creator, like every single game review site and list and everything, everyone's game of the year this year was Baldur's Gate 3, and so is mine. And it's a really good game, you know, it is. I've been a fan of Larian for years. Honestly, if you've played Baldur's Gate 3 and loved Baldur's Gate 3 and haven't gone back and played the Divinity Original Sin games, which they made, which are basically slightly smaller versions of Baldur's Gate 3, you should do that. You should really go back and play Original Sin 1 and 2. They're fucking great games. You're doing yourself a disservice by skipping them and only playing the popular one. But I digress. You see, like, the game is great, don't get me wrong. There's hours and hours and hours and hours of content. So many, you know, well-acted dialogues and powerful moments and creative possibilities for builds and taking your own path to a degree, obviously. I mean, all games are somewhat railroaded, but you have a lot of options and freedom within that, and it's really cool for that, you know. I'm not knocking the game at all. As I say, it is my game of the year, out of a very limited pool, but it is my game of the year. But I guess what I said just a second ago about it having hours and hours and hours and hours of content, I feel like this is something that's been going on for a while, right? My game of the year last year was Elden Ring, which was another game with hours and hours and hours of content. And I like that game. I like that game a lot. It was my game of the year. I snubbed a lot of very good games because I put 200 odd hours into Elden Ring, you know? It was a great game. And yet, despite all the brilliant things that Elden Ring did, despite all the brilliant additions to the formula, you know, the open world, you know, I'm not usually a fan of them, but it did give you a lot of creative freedom in where you wanted to go and how you wanted to do your build, you know. The weapon art system was great, there was some really interesting character plot lines, the lore was, you know, say what you like about George R.R. Martin, but there was some very interesting lore to that game. Probably the most involved in lore I've been in a Dark Souls game since Bloodborne, I think. A Dark Souls game, I call them. You know what I mean, a From Software game. This is why I should script my videos, man, holy shit. But I completed it, and I tried to play it again, and I didn't want to. I was fatigued by Elden Ring once I completed it. Fully fucking fatigued. I wanted to try out loads of different builds and engage in the PvP and, you know, see, you know, be as hyped for the DLC as everyone else. But once I was done with that game, I was done with it. Because, like, I've played Dark Souls 3 for a similar amount of time, a little bit longer, maybe. And in that time, I have run through that game so many times. It had so much replayability for me. But once I was done with Elden Ring, I was done with Elden Ring because it was so fucking big. I just can't work up the enthusiasm to play through that game again. And Baldur's Gate 3, I hate to say it, great game, really is a great game. I'm probably going to play through it once, ever, and then I'll be on to the next thing. And that is something which I think is becoming an endemic issue. Is that the word? Endemic? Again, I haven't scripted this. It's becoming an issue with the games industry, I think. You don't have to look very far to find videos of various CEOs saying they want to have the next big thing, the next thing to take up all of your time. It's not enough to have a 20-hour experience that you really like. It has to be the game that you are solely playing for 6 months or more. It has to be the thing that you invest your entire life into. That is what the big companies are looking for now. That's why they keep knocking out things like Anthem and what was it, that Redfall game and God knows what else. All these games that have the biggest budgets in the world. They put money and marketing and endless talent into these games. And they fail. And they fail because so many other companies are trying to do the exact same thing. They're all competing, not for a part of your time, but for all of your time. It's an issue with the way that games are financed these days, right? Like, getting the initial buy-in isn't enough. The shareholders want more money, and we have to keep coughing it up. And in order to do that, you can't just have people buy your game. They have to become invested in your game. They have to keep going back to your game, buy the DLC, buy the microtransactions, buy the loot boxes, buy the battle pass, buy more and more and more. And it doesn't matter if the game's fun or not, it just needs to be compelling, and it needs to be something that you'll keep going back to over and over again and pouring all of your money into. And the truly wild thing is, this has overflowed into games that aren't even after your money in that way. We've become, as gamers, a culture of people who are so obsessed with games that have to be this monstrous, overarching, unending experience, this sort of game that you pick up and invest your entire life into, that you play 8 hours a day for weeks and weeks and weeks on end and still don't see the end of. It's become something that, even in the case of Elden Ring, and even in the case of Baldur's Gate 3, games which aren't trying to nickel and dime you at every last turn, they still have to be these monstrous, absolutely monstrous time sinks. And this is an issue. This is an issue. I find this to be a big issue. It's a lot of the reason why I didn't get to play that many games this year, because the games I did play were fucking huge, and the games I wanted to play were fucking huge. And there's just not enough hours in my life for that, you know what I mean? You got Breath of the Wild you got Tears of the Kingdom over here. Sorry, I'm laughing because I just said Breath of the Wild. I'm going to leave this in, fuck it. I just said Breath of the Wild. I forgot what the name of the new Zelda one was called. You got Tears of the Kingdom over here. You got Diablo 4 over there. You got Final Fantasy 16 over there. You got games upon games upon games. 80-hour games, 100-hour games, 120-hour games, all competing for your time. And there's not enough of it. So rather than sell 6 20-hour games to someone, the games industry would rather sell one 120-hour game to you and milk it for every last penny it's worth. And I don't know how long they can keep this up, because these massive projects, as I just said, they keep failing. They keep failing. Oh yeah, there's success stories. Baldur's Gate 3 and Elden Ring, they're incredible games. They are success stories for a reason, because they are very, very, very good, and not all these games are, bear in mind. These games are fucking great, and I hold them up as paragons of how you can do a game of that size well. But it's not sustainable. For every one of these games that is a massive success like those games, there's 5, 10 even that crash and burn, and you see the big companies lay off all their staff, and everyone mock it on Twitter, and it get a 20% on Metacritic, and it dies a death, and the company then has to invest even more and even harder into making sure the next one is a success, because now suddenly there's a lot more riding on it. I don't know, man. I think this bubble's gonna burst. I don't think it's going to last. I'm hoping for the game developers' sake that it doesn't mean that there's going to be even more layoffs in 2024 than we saw in 2023, but it's concerning. It really is. My hope is that more of these companies start to see sense. They start to see the value of smaller experiences, of AA experiences. Remember when that was a thing that people were saying, like, what, 5-10 years ago? People made a big thing about Hellblade: Senua's Sacrifice. Another great game, I should add, because it was, what, 10-12 hours long? Short little experience, relatively short anyway. I mean, don't see movies that long, do you? But relatively short experience, well written, well crafted, thumbs up from everyone, you know? Cost 25 quid. You'll note that since being bought out by, I believe, Microsoft, we've not seen the sequel to Hellblade. It's been in development for a very long time, and I'm expecting it to be overbloated, overblown, overmarketed, and probably not as successful as the original. But I digress. I mean, what can I say? I mean, I love my indie games, man, but, I mean, again, for every one of them that is a roaring success, for every Hades, for every Hollow Knight, for every whatever the current thing is, there's, in that case, thousands of failures. Products that barely got off the ground, if at all, that maybe made their budget back if they're lucky, probably didn't though, you know. Indie studios that crashed and burned and never got to go anywhere. So with the indie sphere not really able to provide those sort of middle tier experiences except on very rare occasions, and the AAA sphere sure as hell not even trying, where does that leave us? The downtrodden gamers. Those of us crying out for innovation and creativity and something fresh and new and bite-size in the gaming industry. But while I admit that there is a degree of nostalgia to what I'm talking about, to the love of the old-fashioned game, I do think something needs to change. I do. I mean, I hold up Grand Theft Auto 3 as the start of this craze, and I think that's true, you know? Back when I was a kid, I picked that game up, and I played it to death, don't get me wrong. It had a really novel, original, creative gameplay loop, at least at the time. But I kept going back to it because of that novel, creative gameplay loop. I kept going back to it just so I could, you know, have a car chase with the cops, or just do some taxi missions, or, you know, whatever. Just play around in the sandbox that was provided to me, because at the time that was something that no other games were providing. What I didn't do until years later was actually complete the game, because completing these games, honestly, unless the story is incredibly compelling, it's not the star attraction. The star attraction of video games is the gameplay, and that will always be the case. And I'm a big advocate for games as storytelling mediums, I really am. But, you know, if we wanted storytelling mediums, we'd read a book, we'd watch a film. We want compelling gameplay. And at this point, I'm not seeing it. Outside of these, you know, occasional, genuinely really good breakaway hits, your Elden Rings, your Baldur's Gate 3s, how many times do I need to mention these two games? But outside of that, a lot of these games, they just don't have the gameplay loop. They don't have it. So all you're left with is a time vacuum, a money vacuum, a seemingly endless dopamine hit of watching numbers go up, and far too many hours to put into a story just to say you completed it. And on that cheery note, I think I'm gonna stop here, or else I will just waffle forever and then suffer when I have to edit this. So thank you for watching. It's been a pleasure. Another great year on the Average Joe channel. Maybe next year I'll actually be able to put together a Game of the Year list, but for now, this is all you're getting. Baldur's Gate 3 is a great game, Game of the Year, and it sucks. Thanks for watching.